Hello, everybody. Welcome back into MLS Digest. I'm Camille, your host, and we're here to preview Week 10 of the MLS season. We're already into the double digits, and we're over 2 months into this season. And have to make a note of the fact that, yes, we did miss the Week 9 upload. Very sorry about that, everyone, for those that were obviously expecting that and looking to be back on our regular schedule, of course, going forward, and also looking to bring back those weekly recap videos, which are obviously much shorter and a little bit more digestible. And so look out for that as well coming up from after week 10 is wrapped up, and obviously going forward will not be obviously a common thing with missing those uploads. But we're here to preview week 10. And a lot happened in week 9, and we're also now getting back into the swing of things with Champions Cup as well, with the semifinals. Today, at the time of this recording, Wednesday, is the first of those two, which is the one between the two Liga MX sides, Tigres and Cruz Azul. It's the first leg of that. And then tomorrow, Thursday, is the first leg of Vancouver versus Miami in that other semifinal. The second leg will be obviously the midweek following this week 10 slate. But we're here to focus on week 10 and specifically just the MLS schedule. Gonna get you info on everything you need to know for injuries, the matchups, and all expectations, with, of course, some best bets sprinkled in there. So without further ado, let's just get into everything you need to know for Week 10. Week 10 slate begins with one of the hottest teams in MLS, Cincinnati, taking on Kansas City, which has also been kind of picking up steam a little bit since firing Peter Vermes, with 2 wins in the 3 games since then. But Cincinnati now 4 wins in a row coming into this one, and in their last 5, that 5th to last match, they also drew to Atlanta. So it's been a great run of form for Pat Noonan's men, specifically since getting knocked out of Champions Cup by Tigres over a month ago, I think it is now. And now with fully focusing on the MLS schedule and kind of dealing with some injuries and some key players returning, especially on that back line, things are really, really looking up for one of the the preseason East contenders. They are in second place in the East, and I think Cincinnati continues to roll in this one. It's hard not to back them in this form they're in. Kansas City, yes, 2 wins in the last 3, like I mentioned, since finding Peter Vermes, but those wins coming against a very poor St. Louis side at the moment, missing a lot of players and just missing an identity, and then also on the road against San Jose, which is not a terrible team by any means, but at the same time, their metrics and the way they play just are literally they're number one in both expected goals and expected goals allowed, and so that runs the risks of really exposing yourself. And San Jose went down 3-0 super early, and Kansas City has been scoring goals even in that loss to Portland, but I think Cincinnati will just be too much to handle. For this Kansas City side. Hadebe is really the only player they're still waiting on to return on that back line, but now they finally get that kind of those 3 center backs kind of situated at the moment with Robinson, Miazga, and Hagelin with the wing backs. They've been dealing with some other injuries. Kubo maybe still not ready to return for this one, but Nwobodo has been fully training after being day-to-day in the lead up to last week's match against the Fire. So you would have to think he returns, and that obviously beefs up that defensive midfield. And obviously Evander as well returned last game and got a couple of goal contributions. So I mean, this team is fully clicking. It's what we all expected them to be. Denke hasn't really missed any time. He's been the one that's been fully healthy at that number 9 role. And even though Kubo might not be playing, and Santos did seem to pick up an injury late in that Fire match, it's going to be interesting to see who maybe doubles up in that dual striker role, or however they decide to run the formation. But I think everyone, even Santos before that injury in the past game, really has stepped up after a lot of, I think, still fair criticism from me and, Cincy fans or just whoever, because no one was really filling in terms of that production if it wasn't Denke, or even like last season. That striker production outside of Kubo wasn't really there. But regardless, I'm going with, for the first best bet, Cincy moneyline and over 1.5. I think Cincy scores 2 here with ease. Kansas City is 5th worst in terms of their expected goals allowed, and still in that bottom 10 in terms of their own expected goals. So while they have been scoring a lot recently, it's been against three pretty poor teams on it from a defensive standpoint in the West in their last three games. And after going to San Jose last week and having to travel back now for another road game against Cincinnati, I think it's just two completely, differences in quality in terms of who they just faced and who they're about to face. And I'm just going to keep trusting the Cincinnati team to ride its hot streak and handle business against Kansas City. Moving on, it's Toronto FC hosting NYCFC. Toronto just picked up its first win of the season after the 9th time of asking, coming up against NYCFC, which also isn't in the best form. Only one win in its past 5, just like Toronto, and 3 wins mixed in there, coming off a pretty poor showing on the road against New England, which has been struggling for the most part of the season to score goals, but picked up one of its few wins, New England, last week out against NYCFC. Toronto returns home here after beating RSL, and that's just been the issue with Toronto, right? Only their first win so far, so how can you really trust them to get a win? But at the same time, on the road, NYCFC has been pretty poor. I think has only picked up points in 2 out of 5 road games, and one of those was that opening day draw against Miami where they, were up a man and let Miami come back. And so coming off another road loss here, have to travel once again. This NYCFC team just hasn't been spending. It seems like it's just been one of the least, concerns for Citigroup in terms of its clubs, in terms of actually showing that ambition and going out and getting higher level DPs in the past, handful of years. They sold Santi Rodriguez, and you're just not going to be really relevant in this league. Maybe they can, stay around these positions and contend for a play-in spot, but outside of that, I just don't see a clear direction, or I don't have belief in this team until kind of, shown otherwise in terms of the spending, in terms of the front office. But I slightly favor Toronto here. Brynhildsen, who has been dealing with just consistent injuries since he signed, getting a sub appearance there, starting, but then getting injured in another appearance, and so on and so forth. Like, is this guy ever going to just play like 2 consecutive games of starts? Meanwhile, DeAndre Kurz has an ankle sprain, so that's the striker depth just completely shot there. So they really need Brynhildsen to stay healthy. But this defense, to me, has really been showing good things. You can see in the past 5 weeks, or specifically 4 weeks, just 1 goal allowed, including obviously 2 0-0 draws, which isn't pretty at all. But, points are points. I did predict this team to be, I think, wooden spoon, if I'm not mistaken, or at least a contender for it. But at the moment, this defense is looking strong against, actually even 2 high-flying teams several weeks back against Miami and Vancouver, also Minnesota. All those 3 being, that Miami one was on the road. It says versus, but regardless, some very strong defensive showings. They haven't been creating the level of chances that they want, but at least they're keeping things within grasp. And against this NYCFC team, I think building off that RSL win, I think why not? Why can't they get back-to-back wins? I don't really have full faith in either side, but Brynhildsen did sub on in the last 20 minutes or so maybe he can start. And obviously with Bernadeschi and Insigne actually healthy for about 3 or 4 games now in a row, and actually, at least just being out there, that gives you a chance, especially at home. So I think they're going to get out and get their first win at home of the season. I'm going to call this one a 2-1 Toronto win. Next up, it's the other New York team, the Red Bulls, hosting Montreal. And the Red Bulls, last time out, a pretty shocking defeat to DC United, who actually scored both their goals after Christian Benteke came off injured around the 23rd or so minute. And we're down 2-0 pretty much around halftime in this game. Tried to mount a comeback, but couldn't, complete it to at least get a point. And they're sitting 9th in the East. And this is kind of what I expected out of this Red Bulls team. It's just not been pretty. The Choupo-Moting signing is really kind of 50-50. He's gotten some goal contributions. I think like 2 out of those 4 goals or whatever he has are penalties, though. And Forsberg has had his moments of brilliance, but the formations, I feel like, and the personnel have been kind of flip-flop too much out of the coach. And, you know, they should be beating the minnows in the East, such as the DC, such as now, once again, the last place team in the East here in Montreal. But Montreal's been kind of tough to play against, especially since the coaching change. Yes, they are still very, very young, and they don't have an incredible amount of depth or talent, but the interim coach has them playing with energy. They're pressing well, and they're getting just kind of these measly points, but they're frustrating teams in the process. I mean, it may not be, obviously, it's not going to be enough. They need to get wins to obviously contend for any type of play-in spot even, but I mean, they're making teams like Orlando, teams like the Fire, I mean, who have shown these moments of offensive brilliance, and they're making it difficult for them. So after a couple home games, after that 7-game away start to the season, they have to travel here again. And the weather might be a little disruptive as well. And honestly, like, it's just the talent gap is just a little bit in favor of the Red Bulls, but they also have some issues on defense now with Dylan Nealis kind of picking up an injury. And it just seems like they're just a tough team to really predict. They play in these usually 1-goal games that they kind of more so than often than not come out on top in, but you just never really feel like sure about this Red Bull team really against really kind of even mid-table opposition unless they are at home. And coming off this loss to DC at home, you feel like they should be bouncing back with another opportunity for one of these poor East teams. But I mean, I got burned by them last week personally, and for Montreal, I mean, their main DP that they signed from the Revs, Vrioni, had one substitute appearance 2 weeks ago, and now he's injured again. And so that's just been, these are just two teams that it's almost impossible to really like put your faith in. Obviously, specifically Montreal, because there's almost no chance they even make the play-in, but they're still hunting for that first win. They're still hungry. I'd say they're the hungry out of the two teams at the moment. But I'm going to go for another draw in this one. I think Montreal is really going to be contending for one of those bottom spots. I'm going to go 1-1 between Red Bulls and Montreal. In another all-Eastern matchup, it's the Union hosting DC United. Both these teams coming off wins, as we just discussed, with DC United pulling off that upset on the road against Red Bulls. But the Union now bouncing back from several weeks of poor form after that very, very hot start to the season. And now Gazdag is gone, so they got their first win post the Gazdag, trade or what have you, him moving to the Crew. They picked up a pretty convincing 3-0 win against Atlanta. Atlanta, I think, looked far worse than I think the Union did, convincingly win that game or look on par with the level that they did in the first 5 weeks of the season. But regardless, still a great bounce back win for the Union. But they are going to be missing some players here. Obviously, we have Glavinovic, who's out for a lot of time and has been out for several weeks. But also Lukic picking up that red card, which was one of several red cards last week in Week 9 that, were just shocking that it was called. I think his was a double yellow. But regardless, he's going to be out for this one. So that leaves a gap in that midfield, especially on the defensive side. And you really don't have too many replacements because Bueno has been out for several weeks with a hamstring issue. And old man Alejandro Bedoya has really only put in a couple sub appearances for 10 or 15-minute shifts. So the question is, how do they really line up in that midfield? Do they just simply fill in with more attacking, talent? Or do they put in maybe, or who lines up next to Jean Jacques, because that's really your only defensive-minded midfielder of the bunch that really remains that I feel like can put in a real shift. And so DC United on the other end, though, Benteke, as we mentioned in the Red Bulls preview just a segment ago, Benteke injured early on in that match. Kind of up in the air how severe that is. Will he even make it for this week? And obviously they'd want to be cautious because this team is pretty garbage, and that's really been 80% of their goals, if not more, this season. And so if there's any kind of real risk or concern, then they're going to rest him for this match. And so while I do see some more defensive concerns for the Union, I think ultimately probably Benteke will rest this one. And even though what's his name, Peglow got a couple of goals last week, including an incredible scissor kick, how often is that replicable? I just don't see it. And so I'm gonna go for the Union to win. I think DC United maybe sneak in a goal, but I think the Union will definitely have more than enough to get past this DC team. I'm going to go for a 2-1 Philly win. Next up, it's Orlando hosting Atlanta, and Orlando's past 3 weeks have been a complete 180 from what we saw in the first 5 or 6 weeks, because it's now 3 straight scoreless games for Orlando, one of the most high-flying teams in that opening month and a half of the season. And it's truly been, I believe, because of these two midfielders are missing in Araujo, in Atuesta, who obviously are the engines of that midfield for kind of opposite reasons, I guess, and opposite sides of the ball. But that can't be, overstated enough, because they're running out kind of these younger guys, I believe, and that's just really played a key role into why they can't transition so precisely, so freely, and you're playing these more kind of grinded out games where the risk and reward kind of how you're kind of lining up in terms of your strategy is completely different. And so you really, once again, I feel like the injuries here have been kind of week to week for both those midfielders, and the updates, at least from what I've seen, have been so the updates have been almost non-existent in terms of how close they are, or how, if we'll see them even this week. And so I can't really say what to expect from this Orlando team besides what we've been seeing if they don't return. But on the other side, Atlanta has been absolutely abysmal. The effort just hasn't been there for what is one of, if not the most expensive assembled teams this season. And now Latte Lath, who picked up a red card, is also suspended for this match. And so the attacking, the finishing hasn't been there. The effort hasn't been there. A lot was said after that last loss to Philly, and we'll see if mentally, if they can turn that around and put in actual, shifts and actually put in some effort. And that can definitely get them a point on the road against this Orlando team that really hasn't had that bite to it in the past several weeks. And so I'm going to go for that. I think it's going to be probably another lower scoring game because of who Atlanta as well is missing, such as Latte Lath. And then the fact that they just haven't pieced it together. But at the same time, Orlando hasn't been this back and forth team. So I don't think Atlanta is just going to figure it all out against this Orlando team who maybe if they played them early on in the season, they could have had a shootout against. But I'm going to say Atlanta turns it around, not fully, but they go on the road and get a point. I don't think it'll be scoreless this time, though. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw, and Orlando's scoreless game run ends. On to the next, and it's Charlotte against the Revs. Charlotte is a perfect 5-for-5 in terms of wins at home, and picking up another statement win last time out against San Diego, in which San Diego went down to 10 men after Andres Reyes in his debut after coming from the Red Bulls last season picked up I believe it was an early red, and Charlotte just flew from there. And it's just what they do. They defend this fortress, and yet again, they're honestly, it's honestly shocking to me that they're another playable price in terms of their money line this week out against the Revs, who are obviously sitting in 11th in the East. But I'm attacking another angle in this game. I'm going for the under 2.5 for our second best bet. I believe Charlotte probably still wins this one, but I think it's going to be more so another 1 or 2-0 type of situation. Charlotte at home, like I said, has been almost impenetrable. They have scored 2 goals in each home game, so this is a little on the riskier side. but at the same time, they've shut out their opponents in 3 out of those 5 home games. And New England here is bottom third, or third to last in terms of their expected goals. And yes, they've had back-to-back wins against Atlanta and NYC, but I'm kind of not convinced. It's mostly been through Carles Hill. He has that magic touch, obviously, but Charlotte's defense is as serious as it gets. They have been allowing a lot of shots, but you also have Christian Kalina behind that back line, which is already elite, and he's been in tremendous form coming off that goalkeeper of the year last season. And so New England, I just don't think has enough to really even score in this one. I don't see them really contributing. But on the other end, that defense continues to be elite. They do have some potential injury concerns on that back line with Fofana and with Miller picking up some sort of knocks late in that last game in that win against NYCFC. But I think they have the replacements still, even if I don't think both don't go, but even in that case, I think the replacements have still played enough, even thus far in the season, where I don't think the level really drops off or will drop off too much if that were the case, and the replacements played. And yeah, Charlotte just locks it down at home. Most of the way they've ran up the score in these games have been just through kind of, such as in this San Diego game, it was only 3-0, I believe. Most of that you could attribute to the red card. I mean, they like to kind of pile it on a little bit later as well. And so the main kind of belief here is that I just don't see New England really posing too much threat. They don't have a lot of the possession. Charlotte really doesn't like to either. But I think in this case, if they cede possession like they usually do, New England, especially on the road, then Charlotte's going to have to break them down in a more methodical manner rather than just these kind of long balls in. And Pep Biel, kind of who has been pretty solid this season from a service production standpoint. But I think the way these teams will tactically set up kind of lends itself to kind of a more methodical game. I think New England's going to really want to escape here with a point, not kind of expose themselves too much. And I just think, while Charlotte could just as well, honestly, I could be convinced as well to just take Charlotte here anyways. I think it's going to be one of those situations such as that Miami game where when they went down to 10 men and just kind of sat back, I think that's what New England is going to do from the outset. So I just don't see Charlotte having that freedom. I don't see them running up the score. And so I see this as probably like a 1-0 Charlotte win. But I like the value we're getting at this under 2.5 because New England on the road, it's just how they tend to play, and they don't have that bite to kind of contend, especially with these are two elite defenses anyways, and I just don't see New England getting many chances. So I think Charlotte wins this one 1-0, but this should be, for the value as well, I think this should be kind of a sweat-free under. Next up, it's the Crew hosting San Jose, and the Crew last week in the battle of the undefeateds against Miami finally picked up its first loss in that game played at the Brown Stadium at Huntington Bank Field in Cleveland. I don't know if you really want to classify that as a home game because of that. I mean, there was just a lot of discourse around, that kind of aspect of it, and the fact that it was in Cleveland and kind of selling out because it is you're playing Miami and Messi. There were a lot of obviously Miami fans there, so I don't know if you could really call it a true home game. But regardless, the Crew have finally tasted defeat. But meanwhile, they get this great opportunity to bounce back and just get back into the swing of things with an actual home match in Columbus against San Jose. And San Jose, after a couple of results several weeks ago, including that stomping of DC to maybe turn things around, have now lost back-to-back weeks once again, including 5-3 last time out against Kansas City at home, where they went down 3-0 before 30 minutes passed. And they tried to stage a comeback, but fell short. And they're also missing their top goalkeeper, Daniel, with a head injury. That was his first week out last week, and I don't think it's a coincidence that they ship goals anyways because they're literally, like I mentioned earlier in the show, they're number one in their expected goals, but they're the worst team literally in expected goals allowed. So they just run this brand of football and play that brand. But now you have as well to add to a couple of injuries between the team. You have Daniel out, who when last year when they had also terrible defensive metrics, their goalkeeping room was absolutely terrible by the numbers in terms of what they were not saving in terms of the expected numbers and the expected saves and all that. And Daniel has kind of been that solid keeper so far this year in terms of actually just at least being around average or so. So I don't think it's a coincidence that last week when he's out and the backup played that, maybe there were a couple of goals that shouldn't have went in, but that's just how poor this goalkeeping room and the defense anyways of the Quakes is. And for the third best bet here, I'm going with the Crew on the -1. So it's for them to win. It's technically for them to win by 2 or more, but if they only win by 1, it's a push. And we get this at -125. And I think it's good odds. I think the Crew are going to roll here. San Jose is going to have to travel, obviously far from the West Coast. And Wilfred Nancy's team even though they lost that match against Miami, it was just one of those typical games where you just think how is Miami escaping with even some sort of result when the Crew created I think almost 3 expected goals in that match and they get held off the score sheet. And it's just one of those situations you just take it and move on. It's a long season, but there's really no world in which I see this Quakes team competing with the Crew, especially on this travel and especially with a Crew team that is basically fully healthy outside the Camacho situation. And I think they should have no problem winning this game. And, I see them scoring at least 2 or 3. And so that should hopefully at least get for them to win by 2 over the line. But in the event that they just simply win, this bet for the purposes of the bet would just push. So I think San Jose's woes are going to continue here. Just not a good matchup. And especially as well with Daniel out, we're going to see even more of those poor defensive numbers kind of stand out for this team. Moving on, it's San Diego hosting RSL. And this is the first 2-unit bet of the season for the show. And I'm taking San Diego on the money line. I posted this earlier on Twitter during the week, just in case the line moved or anything, if people were interested. It has not moved yet. It doesn't really, matter to me. I just wanted to get it out there. That has nothing really to do with the confidence in the bet. I do expect it to maybe move a little bit, get a little juicier by the time of Saturday, the game. But I'm taking San Diego on the money line. The price is okay, but I have high confidence in the San Diego team. They are coming off back-to-back losses, both of those being on the road. And one in which last game, like I mentioned in that Charlotte preview, they got a red card due to Andres Rea's, nature, I guess you could call it at this point, because he just always makes these dumb plays. And it just put them down from the beginning. So I think that's one where they kind of pushed that aside. It was already a tough game to begin with. Playing at Charlotte is never easy in terms of getting out of there with a result. But they're back at home here against an RSL side that is just, it's absolutely abysmal. This RSL side, outside of Diego Luna, is really, really short and struggles to create chances, create goals, and really just pull off results. Most of their games have been one-sided, one way or the other, and their few wins this season have been at home. The only other road result was at Houston, where Diego Luna really stole the show with a standout performance. But really, when the results have gone their way, Diego Luna has been at the forefront. And he did get a red card, which was a terrible decision, by the way, in that loss to Toronto last time out. But it did get rescinded, so he will be fine here. But it's not even, that has really not much to do with the bet. Diego Luna playing or not, that doesn't really change my level of confidence here, because the team outside of Luna is subpar. and the striker situation is terrible as well. San Diego obviously is dealing with the injury of Ingvardsson, but Chucky Lozano has been back. Dreyer has been fully healthy, and now you have Ilioski, who has made a couple of sub appearances behind Angel, and we'll see who starts in this one. But to me, I just think the San Diego side, we know who they are already. They're going to keep possession. They're going to be on the front foot. It's not just possession for possession's sake. They're really, really good on set pieces. And I think this is a fantastic bounce back opportunity against a really poor RSL side, who last time out as well, in that Toronto match, they went down in about 10 minutes. And Toronto just completely gave up the ball to them. And they just completely offered really nothing. No clear-cut chances. A bunch of shots outside of the box that just, went flying into orbit. And I just think RSL will be completely outclassed in this one. I think the price is good enough. And this is kind of the start of when I like to start kind of getting these 2 units in. I wanted to start after, a decent amount of time, because doing it too early in the season, we don't really know too much in terms of the trends, in terms of just week by week with these teams. But I think now is a good opportunity, and this is one spot that I really like. San Diego is going to be back at home in this one, and yeah, I just see them rolling against an RSL side that on both sides of the ball has been very, very subpar. Moving on with another Western matchup to kind of continue this later part of the slate on Saturday. It's a Texas derby. Houston takes on Austin, and I'm taking, for the 5th best bet, Austin on the plus 0.5, which is also double chance. So Austin to draw or win at minus 130. And Houston has just one win this season. Let's just start with that. Their only win was against an LAFC side that was in the middle of a congested schedule, where they were heading over to the second leg after that match, to the second leg of the Champions Cup quarterfinal to Miami. And Houston has done well to get plenty of draws this season, but for the most part, it's been very, very frustrating from an attacking perspective for this Dynamo team to score goals, and they're bottom 5 in terms of their expected goals. Meanwhile, this Austin side is top 5 in terms of expected goals allowed. The defense has been the first thing on the mind of Estevez and this team's identity, and they love to counter. They love conceding possession. Houston is kind of up there in terms of the possession numbers. Meanwhile, Austin completely gives it up, and so that's how this game should go, how I see it going. Austin's best chances will be on the break, and Houston is still dealing with their goalkeeping situation as well. They had to sign another keeper because they were down to their 3rd string goalie, and so just as well, this Dynamo defense is levels below what it was even last season and seasons back. And they did add the signing of Linger, who scored in his debut off the bench. I think he played only about 15 minutes to tie it in stoppage time against the Rapids. And he does seem a little bit more so of what they actually need. It actually could be a beneficial signing for this Dynamo side, because they're lacking that creativity, that those 1-2 combinations, and just simply kind of that effort from an attacking perspective. But will he really be able to go after a 15-minute stint? I mean, it's not like he hasn't been out without play for that long coming from Slavia Prague, but still getting into this team on a full basis, I think will take maybe one or two more games. And so he probably won't start in this one. And we already know about this Houston attack. It's just not, outside of him, I just don't think he's still, even in a limited appearances, Linger is going to completely re-energize this team. And so I think Austin's going to make it difficult, as they do for many teams. And, hopefully we look for them to take their chances on the break. They've been kind of iffy on that, on that regard. But last time out, Bukhari was coming off a bit of a knock and played for about half an hour, so he should be good to go, hopefully, for a start here. But regardless, we know how Austin likes to play. They keep it very limited. A lot of their games are these 1-0s or even some 0-0s, but it's been really hard to beat them. in many instances. And the Dynamo with one win, even though they are at home here, it's not something that Austin, like another Western team, isn't used to, because they are also in Texas. This kind of home advantage doesn't really matter. And yes, you could say form flies out the window, the cliche in these derbies. But at the same time, I think with how we just know how tactically this game is going to set up, I think Austin to at least pick up a point in this one is a very, very good, has a very good likelihood. Moving on, one of the final games of Saturday's slate is Nashville hosting Chicago, two lower tier at the moment playoff teams in the East. And for the sixth best bet, I'm going with the over 2.75. So it's a 50-50 split on half the bets on over 2.5, and then the other half is on the over 3. So if there's only 3 goals, you'd basically win half of the bet, and then the other half is a push. And so for the bet to fully hit, we need 4 goals. But we're getting a better price by splitting it down the middle, where we can at least hit half the bet. This is just an explanation if you're not kind of familiar with these Asian total lines. But regardless, this game should have goals in it. The Fire, they just have goals in them. 7 out of their 9 games have seen at least 3 goals. There's only been one of their games where both teams to score has not hit out of the 9, and that was the 0-0 draw against Miami, where, from the eye test, it was just a big amount of unluckiness in terms of just not even getting a single goal in that game. But regardless, this Fire team struggles to hold clean sheets, and they are very, very hard to keep out of the net. And this Nashville side as well has really been picking it up. Both these sides now are in the top 6 in terms of expected goals. Tehran as well picked up an injury early on in that match last time out against Cincinnati, so that's another big blow if he isn't able to go for this one for that starting center back pair. Sam Rogers has been a solid replacement in terms of just getting the minutes and eating up those minutes, but that doesn't mean that this Chicago back line has been without its faults. And Chris Brady can play out of his mind many weeks and has, but the amount of chances they concede, it's almost impossible for him to pull off so many just fantastic reflex saves where it's just been evident that by the fact that they've only held 1 clean sheet. And so on the other end for Chicago, though, everyone from an attacking perspective is finally back. You have Brian Gutierrez healthy. That front 3 has been playing several games together now after a couple of kind of knocks early on in the season. And for Nashville, things are pretty healthy. This midfield has been kind of really good. Against Seattle, though, on the road, I mean, yes, a very tough place to play, but back at home here, they kind of have really picked up form in the past several home games from a scoring perspective. And we're still waiting word on what's happening with Walker Zimmerman after that nasty head injury against Charlotte, because he's now missed 2 weeks in a row in that concussion protocol, or just dealing with recovering from that. And from what I've seen, it's really not clear how close he is to go. But regardless or not, I think goals are a good bet in this one, just from the nature of these two teams, and specifically Chicago. They just do not change their approach no matter what it is, what the situation is, road, away, the opponent. And so while Nashville should probably have a little bit more of the ball and keep Chicago a little bit under it in terms of that pressure, Chicago, especially with Zimmerman out, is going to get those chances on the break. And I'm just going to split the bill here. I'm not going to make it a little bit cute with both the score and the over 2.5. I think this is still a good enough price where we split the wager on that 0.75. And I think this one ends something around a 2-2 result draw. To close out Saturday's night slate, it's the Rapids hosting the Sounders. And the Rapids, coming off 4 points in the last 2 matches, almost stole all the 3 points against Houston, but gave up a very late stoppage time goal to the aforementioned winner by Linger when we were talking about the Houston match. And Seattle now back-to-back wins, despite Jackson Reagan now being out for about a month at least, one of their top center backs, but they picked up a road win against Nashville, that 1-0, and then last time out, a completely convincing win against Nashville. And, well, I just don't know with the Sounder side. I mean, they're really hard to predict. They're still dealing with this, or they were at least dealing with this injury carousel, but De La Vega and Morris finally came back. So maybe we can see a little bit of continuity and just normalcy in terms of a lineup from the Sounder side in terms of what we can expect. But from the Rapids, it's a little bit questionable in terms of that attacking output. They have won the past couple of games at home against some pretty solid sides in terms of Charlotte and San Diego. But we know that they don't and aren't really able to keep the ball a lot. Meanwhile, Seattle has one of the best possession rates in the league. But at home, that might just not matter as much in terms of just that feeling, that little sense of urgency that the Rapids might tend to get. And I think it's one that's hard to call. I've been kind of wrong in terms of a lot of the Rapids individual results. I pre-season, from a season-long perspective, I did predict this team to be around where they are now, challenging for that, like, one of those top 4 spots. But I just haven't had luck on any of their individual games. And the Sounders are obviously a tough opponent. I don't think they've won any of their matches against the Sounders of their last 5 matchups. And so they're going to be looking to obviously right that ship and screw it. I'm just going to say I'm not confident on this one. It's probably one of my least confident, predictions or just outlooks on a match this week, for a week that I really like, actually, from just a grand perspective of things. But I'm going to go the Rapids win this one in a close one, 2-1. We're now on to the Sunday slate, which consists of 3 games after last weekend. All 15 games were on Saturday because of Easter Sunday. And so now we finally have a Sunday slate once again. And we start with 2 of the West's best in terms of Minnesota, which is 3rd, hosting the Whitecaps, which are 1st. Obviously, we know all about the Whitecaps and their fantastic form. Only 1 loss this season. Meanwhile, Minnesota, I think only as well 1 loss this season, but far more draws mixed in there than I think they would have liked, especially against some weaker opponents. In the past 2 weeks, there are now 2 straight matches of scoreless draws against teams that they really should be beating. But the problem is when the other teams kind of make them have possession and make them dictate things, dictate the terms and dictate just the chances. That's where Minnesota so far has not really been able to, show improvement, show that they can still win games in different ways, because both of these teams are Minnesota has one of the worst possession rates in the league. That's just how they like to play with these wingbacks, with their 2-striker setup. They get on the break, and that's where they can really do damage when they link up like that. Meanwhile, Vancouver, as we know, loves to have the ball. But the thing is, at the time of this recording, that first leg for Vancouver against Miami, which is going to be at home on Thursday in that Champions Cup semifinal, that hasn't been played yet. It's still only Wednesday at the time of this recording. And so it's really hard to see, I think a lot of it depends on how this first leg goes for Vancouver, because will they still be in it? I think they obviously still should be. I think they should put in a strong performance at home against Miami. But, that second leg, regardless, they're going to have to travel to Miami for that second leg after this game against Minnesota. And we saw this same thing with LAFC, where they went on the road to Houston just before that second leg at Miami in the quarterfinal, and they lost 1-0. And I actually did predict that to be a Houston win, and that was their first and only win of the season so far. And it's just one of those situational things that, despite the fact that the Whitecaps should be the favorite team, they actually are not already on the books. Minnesota is basically a plus 100 odds to win this game. And I just think regardless even of the result of whatever it will be in that first leg against Miami, that it will just play right into Minnesota's hands, where the Whitecaps will still want to continue their good form in MLS, but in some way they're going to have to rotate, and in some way they're going to be just a little bit more tired, and Minnesota will give up the ball and they'll hit them on the break at home, and they're going to be the more energetic team, and it's probably going to be a lower scoring game just because of how the Whitecaps will dominate the ball, but it's going to be just a little bit less, back and forth from that perspective. We just saw that in their last game out against St. Louis, where they had to dominate possession against this abysmal St. Louis side that just can't combine for possession and passing. But on the other end, St. Louis couldn't punish them. I think a goal was actually disallowed for St. Louis. But regardless, Minnesota is a completely different team in that respect, where they will, if you do allow them to get on the counter, then that's where they're at their best. And so I think that's what the books are kind of trying to say, is that with all these situations in mind, it just plays right into Minnesota's hands. And so I think Minnesota does get the job done. Maybe not because they're better, but because of, once again, it's just how it goes. And the Whitecaps are not used to this level of consistent playing and going this deep into a tournament. And so they're going to slip up here, I believe. And I'm going to go for a 1-0 Minnesota win. Next up for Sunday slate, it's Miami hosting Dallas. And Miami is still unbeaten, as we know. They have the Champions Cup semifinal against Vancouver before this match, where they have to go to Vancouver and then have to come back all the way to Miami, the longest travel in the entirety of MLS, for this Dallas match. And Dallas on the other end, coming off, you could call it a pretty good 5 weeks, I would actually say, because 2 wins, 2 draws, and a loss. And the 2 draws were both on the road. So I would say you take those almost 100% of the time. But the problem is that Peter Musa is dealing with some sort of, I believe it is an ankle injury that kept him out last game. And, his status is once again up in the air for this one. So that definitely takes a lot of bite out of this attack that has primarily been a kind of a 1-2 battery ram of Acosta and Musa. And Dallas just hates having the ball. They really are not good at keeping possession. That's just not how they play through teams. But Miami is going to be obviously tired here, and we saw them, I believe it was in that match that was sandwiched between the quarterfinal against LAFC, that was the one against Toronto, where they just didn't look all that interested, energetic, and had that same killer instinct, because they were in a sense preserving themselves, because they had to come back, and eventually obviously did, against LAFC, but they were held to a 1-1 draw to Toronto in that case. So this is another one of those where a draw could be on the cards once again, just because of all these factors. But also at the same time, we're going to have to see just what happens in that first leg, because that will kind of also determine the level at which maybe Miami will rotate or not. So I think if Musa remains out, I think Miami still actually probably does sneak this one by. And at the very least, obviously, I think they pick up a draw on this one. I don't think they'll be beat by Dallas. But another upset in that sense is on the cards, because it's just that same type of situation. But with Musa potentially and probably remaining out, I think Miami gets this one done 2-1 for the win. To close it all out on Sunday Night Soccer, it's LAFC hosting St. Louis City. St. Louis City has been on Sunday Night Soccer a couple of times, I believe. I think this is LAFC's first time this year on Sunday Night Soccer, if I'm not mistaken. And LAFC coming off a comeback draw against Portland, in which Bowanga scored the game-tying penalty kick. Giroud finally scored his first goal in MLS play since coming over this last summer on a admittedly beautiful free kick. But in open play, that's still another complete different thing. And let's not get ahead of ourselves there in that regard, because he's still been a major flop. But regardless, even though Boanga's penalty or goal was a penalty, I think that was for sure one of his better games of the season so far in the first dozen or so games, including Champions Cup, that LAFC has already played, where Boanga has definitely been a little too quiet compared to obviously his ridiculous standards, with it being, in Golden Boot contention basically every year prior. And so St. Louis on the other end, their winless run continues. They did good to at least get a draw against the top team in the league. Vancouver at home had a disallowed goal as well in that one. But still, too many injuries to really trust this team. LAFC is going to have to dictate the play, I believe, because St. Louis is just, once again, one of the worst teams in terms of possessing the ball. LAFC would obviously rather be on the break, but that's just how it's going to be. We saw this same situation late last season where LAFC, I think, only won 1-0. And I think it's going to be something along those lines. I think LAFC wins this one like 2-0 or something along those lines. They made a couple of midfielder signings actually today at the time of this recording, at the transfer deadline for MLS, with Frankie Amaya and Ryan Raposo. Raposo used to be on the Whitecaps last year, and before he was a free agent. And Frankie Amaya was on the Red Bulls before, went to Toluca in the Mexican League for about the last year or so, and now he returns. I think Amaya's one might be a loan, but I'm not fully remembering that. But regardless, they beefed up their midfield a little bit. Meanwhile, St. Louis, once again, it's very hard to trust right now because of that lack of identity and the quality. But to even pile onto that, they just have so many players missing. Lowen is still missing due to his personal issues, and he wasn't training yesterday at the time of this recording, Tuesday. He wasn't training on Tuesday, and they had a couple of center backs training on the side, some first choice center backs with Kessler, or he actually wasn't training. Nilsson was on the side. And so just too many pieces missing. Nothing's really coming together for the St. Louis side, and they're just trudging along. And having to travel to LA is just not an easy thing. They're going to really just be praying for some sort of result with the draw and conceding possession fully. LAFC, I wouldn't call one of the more trustworthy teams when they actually have to dictate the play in that sense. But I think they'll eventually find a chance or two enough to get the job done on Sunday Night Soccer, on that national stage. I'm going to go for, once again, like I said, a 2-0 LAFC win to close out Week 10 slate. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the preview. Let me know what your thoughts are on the matchups for Week 10. I think this is probably one of my favorite slates of the season so far, if not the best slate, at least from a betting perspective. I really like and kind of see these games kind of clearly in terms of some of the way they're going to play out. But let me know what you think about these matchups, what your favorite matchups are, your predictions. And if you're tallying any of the best bets, good luck. If you're not, or fading, good luck as well. And once again, going to be uploading those recaps, those weekly recaps as well, the 15 and 15. Looking to get back into that. And let me know your thoughts and feedback on those as well, or if you maybe think we could switch up the content from that angle of things. But regardless, I'll see you all in the next video, and enjoy this weekend's matches, everyone. See you later.